video game remakes, or effectively when a studio needs money and they've got nothing left to offer us except nostalgia. We live in a time of countless remakes and remasters to the point we are literally almost drowning in them. As I guess, they are bankable IPs with a dedicated fan base already installed and ready to open their wallets. And look, depending on the level of a remake they go for, there's either less work and money is needed up front to produce. And I guess this is a time when game development costs are extremely high and growing, with AAA games often spanning millions of dollars. And sometimes they can be used effectively to help tide us over as studios are working on those new IPs.
Hey, we gotta make some money. Fast! Oh, okay, I saw that. Done. What did you do? I just copy and pasted the code into Unreal Engine and press launch. Oh, brilliant. Less work for us then.
Despite this, there are many games I believe deserve to be remade that sadly sat on the sidelines. So let's have a look at some of those and see if we can work out the likelihood of it happening. The Simpsons Hit and Run. Now, it wouldn't be a video games we want to see remastered list, yes, that's a mouthful, without this game making an appearance, mixing that classic Simpsons humour, family and town with the gameplay of GTA.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Essentially creating a my first GTA for younger gamers, much to the dismay of lots of parent groups at the time. And the style of gameplay worked surprisingly well within the Simpsons world. Building slightly on from the developer's previous game in The Simpsons Road Rage, was effectively a clone of the game Crazy Taxi. Now, still a good game, but The Simpsons Hit and Run is better. You get to play as all the members of the Simpsons family, besides Maggie. Honestly, how would that even work? Would you get to control a buggy? Or maybe we would have to see her do some more side content, like around her escapades, like in The Short, The Longest Daycare. Okay, that actually sounds fun. That actually sounds fun. Why did I... Okay, right, let's... I know what to do. I know what to do, developers. I got no other ideas, but that one might actually work. You get to play through the game, and around the world, you see all these characters filling up the map. From Hans Moleman, who you can even kick or crash into if you really want that more authentic experience. You get to see Grandpa, Chief Wiggum, and having them give us missions was an interesting experience, as even when missions were similar in style, the added element of doing them with Comic Book Guy or chasing down monkeys for Dr. Nick gave us an element of familiarity that felt like we were helping out old friends. Although if we do see a remake, I would love to see a little bit more variety in mission content and probably some more interiors of buildings as well. Would be amazing to see. Now, getting to see these characters with updated textures in a remake and even potentially adding in new characters who've joined the series in that 20 years since the game actually launched, or even more characters who didn't quite make the cut the first time. Almost an extended version of the game. Honestly, don't lie, we'd eat that up. Faster than Homer and some donuts. Likely, based on the limitation of the time and to allow the different levels of the game to feel unique, the game was separated into 3 distinct maps, which as the game progressed, some of the maps add significant details in the tone, depending on the level, with 7 levels overall, and I think it was the first level you play with Homer, and then you end the game on the 7th level with Homer, and that map is the same, but they're remarkably different. Really different. I don't even know how to start describing that. The maps featured were the Simpsons suburb, so basically the Simpsons house, the school, and the power plant. Then you had downtown Springfield with the hospital, city hall, and Moe's Tavern. And then finally you had the harbour area of Springfield, which had Comic Book Guy's shop, the observatory, and Duff's brewery. Which I actually don't think the harbour side actually features too much in the show. Now, if this was remade, and look, we've seen different YouTubers and designers try and remake it over the years, taking these areas and turning them into a more of an open world, that would probably be the way that they go with it, filling the world with even more side content as opposed to just the collectible cards, which, look, I don't massively like the idea of collectathons. I find collectible cards and collectathon stuff, they're nice there, they're not something that makes me excited about a game. But they could then potentially use other side characters to fill out a bigger quest pool, which would be a lot more fun. For me, in my opinion, I just don't want to collect any more cards. I've had enough of that. Ubisoft has trained me out of collectathons. The reason I think this likely won't happen is little to do with the license issue. But there is probably a way to get around that. I believe EA has the exclusive right to the Simpsons game license, and currently the game's development team are owned by Activision, so therefore Microsoft. But Microsoft would be open to working with them if it worked in their favor. But honestly, the main reason I think they won't do this is Apu. Following the controversy around the character after the documentary, the problem with Apu, they've now pretty much retired the character, and given how prominently he featured in the game's plot, even being a playable character, I think it just makes it very difficult to find a way to move forward with a remake. They would even need the show to find a way to make him work again to allow this, or find a way to rewrite the Apu segments, cutting him out. Replace him with another character. I mean, where there is a will, there's a way, but I don't think they'll do that. So this game will likely be left in the dust on the PS2. There is a chance that it will be re-released in an emulated state, but Xbox doesn't really do this often, and Sony have done that with a lot of odder choices. But if Microsoft want to play ball with EA, I think they could be sitting on a potential winner. Who knows? Or we might see this come to GOG. That could also work, but I think it's probably just stuck in licensing hell. Persona 1 and 2. Now, you might be familiar with this series and thinking of it as the style and substance of the newer entries, known for their banging soundtracks, flashy UIs, and waifu simulator. I mean, social sim meets dungeon crawler gameplay. But what you might not know is the new Persona, which we see now, originated with Persona 3, whereas the first two were more in line with the traditional Shin Megami Tensei games. And yes, there are some similarities. You still play as high schoolers, except in the second part of the Persona 2 duology, but let's not get too into that, because boy, does it get confusing there. Where you do kind of play as an adult who was in the party in the first part, but now she's the main character for plot reasons. That is my get out of jail free card to stop explaining the plot any further. It's for plot reasons. This was the first and only moment in the Persona series with an adult lead, and one that honestly I just don't think they're ever going to repeat. Strikers kind of took it as far as I think they'll ever go again with the Zenkichi, but in the mainline games I solemnly doubt it. Although, instead of like how Persona 3, 4, and 5 dealt with it, the earlier games have it so that all characters in the party possess the wildcard ability, meaning they can use any persona, effectively. This way, no one gets Junpei level jealous at being overlooked. Don't feel sorry for him. He pulled emo old GF. Dude's good. He's living his best life. Even I'm jealous of him. Words I never thought I'd say when I booted the game up. Now, Persona 1's original localization was actually heavily criticized in the West, and this kind of led to Atlus's policy for future releases to stipulate it needs to be a lot more faithful to the original Japanese as they could get. Not 4K kids level jelly donuts finger gun-esque localization. And look, while it's not perfect, we don't have names like Mark anymore, for example, this did start with Persona 2 Eternal Punishment. Now, you might ask, why not the first part of the Persona 2 duology? Oh boy, that didn't launch in the West until the PSP version some 10 years later. Now, why, you ask? Oh boy. There might have been a certain Austrian dictator featured who, for some reason, they thought might not go down so well in the Western port. Now, I also know what you're thinking. How did they handle that in the PSP version? They changed his name to Fura and gave him sunglasses. JRPGs are wild, man. Just wild. The PSP version of Persona 1 had a localization that was way more in line with the Japanese original, and actually had the separate Snow Queen route put back into the game, making it officially available in the West for the first time. Technically, it was actually on the disc for the PS1 route, but untranslated, and the game engine had a meltdown at the Japanese characters. I don't understand it either, but it's there. The route itself centered around an urban legend instead, built around the fairy tale of the Snow Queen. Not that one. Although Elsa and Persona confirmed? Nah, we'll let it go. I hate myself too for that joke. Although both routes are technically canon as it's actually referred to in Persona 2, the only way to play it in the West is through the PSP, which isn't necessarily the easiest thing to do without going the Straw Hat Pirate route and sailing the seven seas with Luffy. The interesting thing about these games is, opposed to Persona 3, 4, and 5, the enemies will attack us as we traverse the world map, as well as dungeons. And they're all random encounters instead of the enemies appearing on the screen in the dungeon. So we can smack them to surprise attack them. Surprise! If they remade them more in line with the new Sona entries, the traversal segments probably wouldn't be too difficult, as well some segments were from an angled 3D perspective, and other traversal segments were in first person, which admittedly is a bit weird and a little jarring, but I wouldn't change much just to shift that to a third person angle. Now, random encounters aren't so prominent anymore, and I think while they can still be used to good effect, I think using enemies on set patterns around the map, or finding some other alternative that allows them to be seen, would probably be a more welcoming for new audiences. I'd be interested to see how they would approach the team members as well, because in Persona 1 and Persona 2, there was no ability to swap them in or out. Once you're locked in on a fifth party member, any other potential members you meet just can't join you. The fact that if they do remake it, I imagine they would bring in all of those characters and therefore create a full party, similar to how other mod Sona games do it, allowing them to kind of switch back and forth. Now, the last concept would be if they bring in social links or confidants in the mix. Considering the time frame over the game times, Persona 1 might only be over a day, give or take. And 2 is literally a matter of weeks. So would they replace this with a sim mechanic then? If you ask me, I don't think adding social links is needed. And I think it would probably just detract from the story as a whole, particularly in Persona 1. Now, the Persona 2 duology, maybe it could work. It would probably have to be a more slimmed down version, probably more akin to the metaphor of Fantasio. That could work. Take away some of the chunks, don't make it 10 levels to go through, make it maybe even 5. That might be able to work, but I still just don't think they really have to do that. I think that a Persona 2 remake might try and place the two games together into one game, therefore cementing the connection between two. But then the work involved with the remake, I think it's more realistic to assume that they were actually going to see them launch within a year of each other. That way, they can charge us £70 twice. Capitalism. Now, as a fan of the Persona series, I have to admit, the only ones I've not played now are the OG 1 and 2 duology. If I'm honest, we might see rumours about a remake, but bad news for people who are hoping for the new Sona approach to a remake. The remake will be less like Persona 3 Reload in scope, and likely it will give us a few quality of life adjustments, but veer more into the traditional Shin Megami Tensei style of the original to properly celebrate the series' history. So to leave those social sim aspects, therefore to the newer entries. Honestly, I think this one is probably very likely. The only thing holding it back is the fact that it's very different to what the series is known for now. That they aren't sure what the fan base will think of the games if it releases, but they could also be holding out for either the 30th anniversary as a celebration of the series' roots, which is actually in 2026. Which feels wild, as I remember the hype we had at that 25th anniversary, and we saw this picture and thought the remakes were coming then, because, they remembered the games that started the franchise. Daddy Atlas actually acknowledged them. Pure copium was inhaled that day. Copium is inhaled a lot when it comes to Persona remakes, and Persona in general, to be fair. Now, the next game on the list is Dark Cloud. Now, this is one of the games that I have loved for years and years, and I know you can play it on PS5 through PS Plus Premium. They have upscale textures and everything there, but it doesn't change the fact that this is a 24-year-old game, yes, from the famed developer and publisher Level 5. In fact, this was their first game they ever made, and let's be real, they've come a long way since then. They've created more franchises like Professor Layton and Ni no Kuni or Yokai Watch. Yeah, I've not played that one either, actually. This game itself has a variety of different gameplay elements, with a significant city building element as we rebuilt the world from an extinction level event. Not quite SimCity level, but, SimCity light. Couple that with a dungeon crawler, where we go into dungeons to reclaim everything and everyone taken away by an evil genie. And the evil genie then placed them back where they were from. A floating ball. Not gonna lie, I want whatever level 5 were having when they cooked up this idea. We even have 6 unique characters players, all with their own different weapons and unique skills. From a cat girl to a genie, including a moon person. Or basically it's a rabbit called Osmond. And did I mention he uses a gun and a jetpack? For portable high ground, one can assume.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
Level 5 started as they mean to carry on with these games. This game was a quirky, off-the-wall number, and then the Ni no Kuni games followed suit. And look, the Ni no Kuni games also have a city-building light mechanic, in Ni no Kuni 2 particularly. But that just makes me think that this mechanic stuck with them, at least in some capacity. And look, the plot of this game is slightly disjointed, all right? And at points, it's very bare bones. I think much of this can be down to the fact that all the characters we collect as allies, they're kind of just there. Effectively, they just live in the character selection wheel, never to be interacted with outside of combat. Even in story cutscenes, once they're in the party, they're just forgotten. In fact, the party never really interact with each other at all, aside from the moment they join. And then, if they do, it's a minor appearance. If they do a remake, I hope they give all these characters more time to shine. Because a moon rabbit, a transmogrified cat girl, because, of course, what kind of JRPG would this be without a cat girl? You know we like cat girls. Look at how well Nekapara did. Also a forest child, a genie, and a sand warrior. Well, yes, this all does sound like a setup to the world's weirdest joke, but these guys deserve some respect, and I think their interactions would be hilarious, and we've missed out on that. That is the biggest band of misfits we could find on this side of the world. Particularly if they add in voice acting like they did for the sequel into the game. And yes, there would be some technical things they need to fix, namely the draw distances. To be fair, this game had a significantly big scope for a first release on a new console in the early 2000s, so I can kind of give them a little bit of leeway. We do see an awful lot of character and texture pop-ins because of this, and we have better hardware now. So these could easily be sorted. In fact, they largely were anyway for the spiritual sequel, Dark Chronicle, and Level 5 now have over 2 decades of experience in game development. One major addition I think they would include: side quests. They had a fair few attached to the city building elements, so now villagers could put requests in. Some things like, I want my house to face the sun in the morning, or, I'd be great to be next to a pond. Very, very basic, bare essential things, right? But I imagine that with the knowledge that Level 5 has now, and they could expand on those side quests, give us more things to do. And they could also give us more reasons to go back and explore the areas that we have left, as it is separated into about 6 distinct areas. And they all have a corresponding dungeon. So again, party members can put requests in. Some of the allies we gain along the way as a story. We have excuses to go back and re-explore those dungeons again. But of course, at the end of the day, how likely is this? Over the years, Sony has shown it some love with a release several years ago. I think it was about 2014, 2015. And then it is now on PS Plus. So it is readily available. And then there's kind of a weird ownership situation with this game. I tried to work it out, and I think Sony owns the rights. Level 5 would therefore need approval to do anything with the franchise, but I don't think Sony have anyone who would want to touch that. It wouldn't be Level 5, so I do imagine we have a kind of similar situation to Bloodborne, where it's stuck in this weird limbo of one side not wanting to acknowledge it, and the other side being interested in bringing it back, based on what Level 5 said in the Polygon article. But considering we haven't seen anything from the franchise in God, the better part of 2 decades now. I think Level 5 might just let it sit for now. Ni no Kuni might be filling that gap in that desire that they want to have. But they've also been on a massive development streak with a series of different games. And potentially they might have had negotiations around it. Honestly, I think the red tape here is what makes this unlikely, due to all these rights issues and all the sides being in agreement. The question is never say never, but for the time being, I don't think Sony is going to let this one ride. Siphon Filter. Now, this series actually put Sony Bend, that was then known as a Dead Tink, on the map. Well, unfortunately, they later became more of a support studio for several years before re-emerging with the slightly divisive game Days Gone, all the way back in 2019. Maybe not the return to original IP they'd hoped for, but regardless, solid game that definitely ran better on the PS5, and probably runs even better now with the remaster just come out. The Siphon Filter series was designed to create a new super spy genre, taking inspiration from games like Metal Gear Solid for that stealth gameplay that was so iconic with that, but also revolving a lot more around action-packed segments as well, so kind of creating some hybrid around it. And considering that the Metal Gear series is effectively on ice for the time being, this could be a good opportunity to revive this series, as there's now a slight gap in this market for spy thriller-like games. Although Siphon Filter never had a 2-hour cutscene. Sometimes I think Kojima is a mastermind. Other times, I remember he did that for Metal Gear Solid 4. Although this series has no cardboard boxes for you to hide in though. And while they continue to release Siphon Filter entries well into the PS2 era, most of the PS2 era games haven't actually been remastered or ported in any way. So the legit way to play them is through an original copy. Although the original PS1 trilogy are now on PS Plus Premium, so you don't necessarily need an original copy to play them. The game series actually centered around 2 different leads who often work together, in Gabe Logan and Leon, who we actually found ourselves rallying around, but it wasn't until the second entry that they really kind of filled out a more supporting cast as well. And I think that a lot of the characters were absolutely brilliant to see play off each other. So I feel that in a remake, it would give them a massive opportunity to let them shine more, give them more screen time. The characters deserve a bit more screen time and development. But what joins all these characters together is they're on a mission to stop the spread of a dangerous biological weapon. Named, you guessed it, Siphon Filter. The truth is, they thought up the name first, probably thinking it sounded cool, before they actually came up with any plot or characters. I kind of have to agree that the name Siphon Filter rolls off the tongue a little too well. But this game and series as a whole could benefit from being remade, adding in those extra story segments, fleshing it out a bit more, and taking the overall premise and character. Maybe not every story beat could actually be a benefit to the series. I think more calling it a reboot than a complete remake would be the beneficial route for this series. I think the approach to levels in this game was actually brilliant. In fact, over the trilogy, the original trilogy, you would replay, I think in number 2, you replayed a slightly remixed version of a level from the first game, which was a lovely callback, but also another great example of asset reuse. But honestly, I say this a lot. Not every game needs to be an open-world, collectathon walking simulator. Sorry to call you out there, like Ubisoft. Sometimes we just want those bite-sized levels. As well as smoothing out the gameplay, which, frankly, it's tank controls. What were we expecting from the PS1 era? And with so many gameplay leaps we've had in recent years, and other attempts at stealth and action gameplay, and let alone parkour movement in general, I think we could see some very enjoyable changes in a remake. Hopefully they could make us feel a lot more like we are actually a secret agent. And introducing these characters into a more modern setting for a new generation could open even more potential story points with the technological age we're firmly in now, and therefore the war of information. Easily taking a leaf out of how Tomb Raider has modernized the series and refreshed it a few times now. It's actually a good blueprint, and they're from around the same time. This was an IP that did well on release. It actually received significant critical acclaim.
I don't want to play with you anymore.
I think it'd be great to see a revival with a new generation. That's kind of what I think revivals and reboots and remakes should be. This was a critically acclaimed game at the time that has fallen out of the public consciousness. And I think it's a great thing to kind of reintroduce. And that is kind of how I think remakes should be, which reintroduces to games that were either flawed or were amazing and just somehow didn't get the attention they deserved at the time. Honestly, though, how likely is it that we'll see this series back on our consoles? Now, Sony Ben, they're off working on a new IP after Days Gone didn't quite do so well. They were really veering for success there, but... And they did include some Siphon Filter references in Days Gone, including the now infamous stun gun. Toasty. Honestly, Sony doesn't seem too interested in revisiting any of their old IPs at the moment. Whether they're watching the PS Plus Premium selection to see what interest is out there, it's kind of yet to be seen. It's probably a few years off before we have any indication of if they are even paying attention to that. I kind of hope they do end up seeing this one again, even if Sony wants to focus on open world games more than the spy thriller leveled style that this series had. Or, you know, maybe they just want to remaster The Last of Us again. Are they honestly trying to beat out Skyrim for the most amount of remasters or something? Should be a Guinness World Book record holder at this point. Our last game on the list is Dino Crisis. If you liked Resident Evil but found yourself thinking, damn, if only this had dinosaurs instead. Well, boy, I've got some news for you. While this franchise did eventually veer well more into action for its second installment and jumping the shark completely for the third, an omen the Resident Evil series should have seen for themselves. I swear though, no one has ever done dinosaurs in space justice. Like how? How can it be that hard? Like really? Now, if you aren't familiar with it, it's effectively a group discovers that a scientist who was presumed dead is actually on a remote island running a research facility, so naturally they send a team in. And lo and behold, lots of dead security personnel, and soon realizing there's dinosaurs on the loose. Yeah, and they still decide to continue on their mission. But they also want to get rescued and, you know, try and not get mauled by a dinosaur. And yes, it is reminiscent of Jurassic Park, but with a much more evil corporation. Also, you can shoot the dinosaurs, raising more ethical questions. So let's just not let Peter know about this, right? But now, for 20 years, the series has been sat on ice. No remakes, no remasters, nothing. Left like the namesake of the game to go extinct and forgotten. The best we now have, actually, is GOG, who have released the first and second game with added improvements in their massive fight for game preservation. Although, considering Capcom have been giving almost all the Resident Evil games the full remake treatment over the last few years, and this series has a very firm root in Resident Evil and Jurassic Park. And Jurassic Park has been another series that's been getting lots of love over the last few years. And look, no, don't worry. I'm not suggesting we get Chris Pratt to voice in a remake. Although I fear soon that will be inevitable, like death and taxes. Chris Pratt's voice is just inescapable. It feels like it's finally time to bring this series back for one more spin. Although I think if they remake this, I would personally maybe ignore 3. It's set in space. Like why? It's not even a non-canon spin-off, like how the Red Dead game made a zombie spin-off. Great fun, not canon, nobody cared. It was great. Maybe the word that would be better to use here is a reboot, remake of the franchise. Building therefore on the core themes and gameplay, but possibly using new storylines and reimagined characters within the world. Although, all that said, the original pitch for Dino Crisis 3 was actually supposed to be a lot more down to earth. It was actually set in a facility in an unnamed city with AI partners. Sounds very similar to how some of the Resident Evil games actually went down later on. And the story itself would have been affected by our decisions, which again sounds very ahead of its time for the early 2000s. And honestly, this sounds incredible. And it does make me quite sad that we never got to see this version, as it never made it that far into production, as all this changed post 9/11. So I understand the decision to veer away from any potential imagery, but the future set in space. No. There's jumping the shark, and then there's strapping it to a rocket ship. And considering these games are cult classics, if it wasn't for GOG, we would be stuck looking at the retro game markets for some incredible prices for a physical on original hardware. Or you could just take a leaf out of Luffy's book and get on the 7 seas. Honestly, of all the games on the list, I actually think this might be the most likely. With how Capcom have been approaching remakes up until this point, even saying themselves, if people are wishing for it, they might listen. Even though the director of the original game has actually been wondering why fans would want this, as they believe Monster Hunter has been doing awesome things. I hope this was some kind of PR for Monster Hunter and not their actual opinion, because even just from looking at it, they're two very different series offering very different things. So there is definitely room for both of them to function without hurting either of their sales. I think the major thing holding them back is the poor reception to the last entry in the series, and maybe developer priorities with Resident Evil remakes. But honestly, I think if they don't remake or even reboot this series, it's basically them saying they don't like money. So honestly, who knows? Maybe when they run out of Resident Evil games to remake, they will come back, Dino tail between their legs, eye up Dino Crisis once more and say, it was always you. Although, to be fair, there isn't actually that many Resident Evil games left now. Just, I think it's 1, 0, and Code Veronica, in the mainline series, that is. So, never say never, as I guess there'll be a bit of a gap in the market for that kind of tense gameplay once more. Unless they release Resident Evil 9. That's a good point. So, there we have it. 5 games that I think deserve a remake, but I don't think we're going to get to see anytime soon. Look, maybe I'm wrong. And they'll be announced in the next couple of weeks or a year. Look at Oblivion. That got announced and released on the same day. Who saw that coming? Certainly not me. But please do let me know down in the comments if you agree, or if you got any other games that you think deserve a remake, but we wouldn't expect. And look, remember to like and subscribe, and check me out over on Twitch at _entitled_gamer. I stream over there several days a week. All links are below, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.